September 3rd, 1945. A young woman collapsed during morning roll call at a makeshift detention facility on Leyte Island in the Philippines. She had not eaten in 72 hours. What happened next would challenge everything both she and the American soldier who found her had been taught to believe about enemies, duty, and what it means to be human in the aftermath of the world's most devastating war. Haruko Yamada's knees buckled as the tropical sun climbed higher over the rows of canvas tents. The ground rushed up to meet her face, but she barely felt the impact. Her body had been shutting down system by system since the morning of September 1st, when the last of the shared rice rations ran out among the Japanese civilian prisoners. Around her, hundreds of other detainees stood in rigid lines, their faces turned carefully neutral as American guards moved through the count. No one broke formation. No one dared to help. In those chaotic weeks following Japan's surrender on August 15th, everyone understood that survival meant following the rules, even when those rules seemed designed to break you. Haruko had been 26 years old when she arrived at this camp, though she felt decades older. Born in Tokyo in 1919, she was the eldest daughter of a schoolteacher who believed education could lift Japan into the modern age. Her father had saved for years to send her to nursing school, a progressive choice in a society that still largely confined women to domestic roles. She graduated in 1938, just as the war with China was expanding, and immediately found work at Tokyo Imperial Hospital. The work was demanding, but meaningful. She learned to set bones, assist in surgeries, and comfort patients facing death with the quiet dignity her culture prized. Then came 1943. The military needed nurses in the occupied territories. Haruko received her assignment to Manila with 3 days' notice. Her father helped her pack, folding her white nursing uniforms with meticulous care. He said nothing about the danger, only reminded her that service to others was the highest calling. She boarded the transport ship believing she would return home within a year. She would never see her family again. Manila in wartime was a city caught between two empires. The Japanese occupation had brought order but also oppression. Haruko worked 8-hour shifts at the military hospital, treating wounded soldiers evacuated from Pacific battlefields with names she had never heard before: Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan. The injuries were catastrophic. Burns that melted skin into unrecognizable masses, limbs torn away by artillery, infections that turned flesh black and filled entire wards with the smell of death. She learned to work without flinching, to close off the part of her mind that wanted to weep for these broken boys who would never see their homes again. By early 1945, everyone knew Japan was losing. American planes controlled the skies, supply lines collapsed. Food became scarce even for medical staff. Then came the invasion of Manila in February. The battle destroyed the city. Haruko and the other medical personnel evacuated to the countryside, carrying whatever supplies they could salvage. They treated wounded soldiers and abandoned churches and schools, performing surgeries by candlelight, rationing morphine until there was none left, and men screamed through amputations. August 15th brought the Emperor's radio broadcast. Japan had surrendered. The word seemed impossible after years of propaganda promising inevitable victory. Haruko listened with the other nurses, hearing the Emperor's voice for the first time in her life, speaking in formal language barely comprehensible to common people. When the broadcast ended, they sat in silence. No one knew what would happen next. American forces moved quickly to secure Japanese military and civilian personnel. Haruko was taken into custody on August 20th, along with dozens of other medical workers. The American soldiers were young, some barely out of their teens. They processed the prisoners efficiently, but not cruelly. She was photographed, fingerprinted, and assigned a prisoner. Then came the transport to Leyte, where the Americans were establishing temporary detention facilities for the thousands of Japanese civilians scattered across the Philippines. The camp on Leyte was not designed for long-term detention. It was a holding area, hastily constructed while the American military figured out what to do with 100,000 Japanese civilians in the Philippines, who needed to be repatriated to a homeland that barely existed anymore. Rows of canvas tents stretched across cleared jungle. Barbed wire marked the perimeter. Guard towers stood at intervals, manned by soldiers carrying rifles. Inside the wire, prisoners organized themselves by profession and origin. Haruko joined a group of nurses and teachers, women who tried to maintain some structure and dignity in the chaos. The first week was relatively stable. Rations arrived regularly, rice and canned vegetables supplemented with bread and sometimes fruit. Prisoners were allowed to wash at designated times. Guards maintained order but rarely interacted with detainees beyond the necessary count and roll calls. Then, the supply problems began. September 1st, the morning rice delivery never came. Guards said transport trucks broke down. By afternoon, detainees were sharing whatever personal stores were. September 2nd, still no food, water only. Some prisoners had hidden rice portions, which they divided among the weakest. September 3rd, dawn broke on the third day without food. Haruka woke that morning knowing she would not last much longer. Her body had consumed its reserves. She felt lightheaded, her vision narrowing at the edges. Other women in her tent were in similar condition. They helped each other stand for roll call, leaning on one another as they shuffled into the assembly area. The sun was already brutal. She took her place in line, focusing on staying upright. The American guards began their count, moving down the rows. She heard numbers called in English. Her prisoner number, 2-3-7-6. She tried to respond, but her voice came out as a whisper, and the ground tilted sideways and she was falling. Corporal Thomas Bennett was walking the perimeter when he heard the commotion. He was 28 years old, a farm boy from Iowa who had been drafted in 1943. He had survived Okinawa, 3 months of brutal combat that killed 12,000 Americans and 100,000 Japanese. He had watched friends die in ways he would never be able to speak about. He had killed enemy soldiers, though he tried not to think about their faces. When the war ended, he expected to go home. Instead, the army sent him to the Philippines for occupation duty. Guard prisoners, they said. Easy assignment compared to combat. He was not sure anything felt easy anymore. Tom reached the assembly area and saw guards clustered around a fallen prisoner. He pushed through and looked down at a young Japanese woman lying motionless in the dirt. Her prisoner uniform hung loose on a frame that had clearly lost significant weight. Her face was gaunt, lips cracked from dehydration. For a moment all he saw was the enemy, Japanese, the people who killed his younger brother, David at Iwo Jima. David was 19 when he died. Tom had received the telegram in April while preparing for the Okinawa invasion. He carried the rage through every battle afterward, a burning hatred that made it easier to pull the trigger. But looking at this unconscious woman, Tom felt something shift. She looked small, fragile, utterly helpless. Not a soldier, not a threat, just a person who was dying. He thought about his mother, his sisters back in Iowa. What would he want someone to do if they were the ones collapsed in a prison camp? The thought surprised him. He knelt down and checked for a pulse. Faint, but present. He looked up at the other guards. Someone get the medic. Then he slipped his arms under her shoulders and knees and lifted her. She weighed almost nothing. The medical tent was 100 yards away. Tom carried her quickly, aware of the other prisoners watching. Army regulations were clear about fraternization with prisoners. Maintain professional distance. Do not engage in personal relationships. Treat them according to Geneva Convention standards, but do not see them as individuals. Tom had followed those rules perfectly for 3 weeks. Now he was breaking them, and he could not fully explain why, except that letting someone die when you had the power to help felt like its own kind of defeat. The camp medic was a sergeant from Louisiana named Robert Hayes. He examined the woman efficiently, checking vital signs and pulling back her eyelids to assess pupil response. Severe dehydration and malnutrition, Hayes said. How long since she ate? Tom did not know. Hayes started an intravenous saline drip, something the camp had in limited supply. She needs food, but her system cannot handle much at once. Small amounts of water first, then broth if she keeps it down. Tom nodded. He should have left then, returned to his duties. Instead, he heard himself volunteer to monitor her recovery. Hayes raised an eyebrow but did not argue. The camp was understaffed and overwhelmed. If a guard wanted to sit watch over a prisoner, that was one less thing for the medics to worry. He showed Tom how to check the drip rate and what signs to watch for. If she seizes or stops breathing, call me immediately, Hayes said. Then he moved on to other patients. Tom sat on a wooden crate beside the cot where the woman lay. The tent was stifling, thick with humidity and the smell of canvas and disinfectant. Flies buzzed around the entrance. He watched her breathe, shallow but steady. Her face in repose looked younger than he'd first thought. Mid-20s maybe. There was something refined about her features, an education evident even in unconsciousness. He wondered who she had been before the war. Probably someone with a family, a profession, dreams that had nothing to do with battlefields and prison camps. She woke after 2 hours. Her eyes opened slowly, focusing with difficulty. She saw Tom and fear flooded her face. She tried to sit up, it was too weak. Tom raised his hands in what he hoped was a calming gesture. You are safe, he said in English. You collapsed. You were in the medical tent. She stared at him, clearly not understanding. He tried to remember the few Japanese words he had learned. Dajubu. Okay. Safe. Her expression remained wary, but she stopped trying to move. Tom reached for a canteen of water. He had learned some basic care from watching medics patch up wounded soldiers. She needed fluids, but too much too fast would make her sick. He unscrewed the cap and held the canteen toward her. Slowly, he said, miming small sips. She hesitated, then accepted the canteen with shaking hands. She drank a few small swallows, then handed it back. Her eyes never left his face, trying to understand what kind of captor he was. Over the next hour, Tom gave her water at intervals. He tried to communicate through gestures and the handful of words they shared. When the medic returned and approved her progress, Tom requested a meal from the guard mess. He brought back a bowl of broth with soft bread. Again, he encouraged her to eat slowly. She managed half the bowl before exhaustion claimed her again. As she drifted back to sleep, Tom found himself speaking quietly and knowing she could not understand, but needing to say something. "I will take care of you," he said. The words surprised him, a promise he had no authorization to make. For the next week, Tom made sure Haruko received regular meals. He learned her name from the camp roster: Haruko Yamada, nurse, civilian detainee. He began teaching himself basic Japanese from a phrasebook he bought from another soldier. She, in turn, practiced English words. Their conversations were halting, limited to simple exchanges. "You are hungry?" "Yes, this is rice." "Thank you." Small phrases that built a fragile bridge across the vast gulf of language and history. Other guards noticed. Some offered good-natured teasing. Bennett's got himself a sweetheart. Others were less friendly. Fraternizing with the enemy was how one sergeant put it, his voice heavy with disapproval. Tom ignored both reactions. He was not entirely sure himself what he was doing or why. He only knew that after years of dealing death, helping someone live felt like something worth doing. Haruko began to regain strength. By mid-September, she was back in the general population, assigned to light duties in the camp infirmary. She was a trained nurse, a skill the understaffed American medical team desperately needed. This gave her and Tom legitimate reasons to interact. He would escort supply deliveries to the infirmary. She would translate medical information between Japanese prisoners and American doctors. Their conversations grew longer, more substantial. Tom learned she had studied nursing in Tokyo, that her father was a teacher who believed education could change the world. She learned Tom had grown up on a farm, that he had a brother who died at Iwo Jima, that he had planned to go to agricultural college before the draft ended those dreams. They discovered they had both lost people they loved to this war. The specifics were different, but grief was a language that needed no translation. By October, something had shifted between them that went beyond prisoner and guard. Tom found himself thinking about Haruko during his off-duty hours. He looked for reasons to be assigned to areas where she worked. He saved portions of his own meals to supplement her rations. She began smiling when she saw him, a small expression that transformed her face from solemn to radiant. Other prisoners noticed. Some Japanese detainees viewed Haruko's relationship with an American soldier as collaboration, a betrayal of her people. Others saw it as pragmatic survival, or even a kind of hope. Evidence that not all Americans were enemies. The camp dynamics were complex. Japanese prisoners segregated themselves by military versus civilian status, by gender, by region of origin. Women occupied a peculiar position. They were less threatening to American guards than male prisoners, which sometimes meant better treatment but also increased vulnerability. Female prisoners looked after each other, sharing resources and protection. Haruko's connection to Tom was discussed in whispers. Some women envied her access to extra food and perceived safety. Others worried she was being exploited. Tom faced his own complications. His commanding officer, Captain Morrison, called him in for a conversation. "We are not here to make friends with these people," Morrison said. He was not angry, just direct. "They are enemy nationals awaiting repatriation. Your job is to guard them, not adopt them." Tom acknowledged the point, but did not promise to change his behavior. Morrison studied him for a moment, then sighed. "Just keep it professional, Corporal. I do not need complications in my command." Tom left the office knowing he was already far past professional. November brought news that repatriation would begin in December. Ships were being arranged to transport Japanese civilians back to their homeland. The announcement created mixed reactions in the camp. Many prisoners were desperate to return home, to search for family and rebuild their lives. Others dreaded it. Japan was devastated, its cities bombed into rubble, its economy collapsed, its future uncertain. Going back meant returning to a country that barely existed anymore. Haruko received her repatriation notice on November 20th. She would depart on December 20th aboard a transport ship to Yokohama. When she told Tom, he felt something close to panic. He had known this moment would come, but knowing intellectually and facing it emotionally were different things. Over 3 months, this Japanese nurse had become the most important person in his world. The thought of never seeing her again was unbearable. Tom spent 2 weeks wrestling with an impossible decision. He could let her go, watch her board that ship and disappear into post-war Japan. Or he could ask her to stay, which meant proposing marriage. The obstacles were enormous. Marrying a Japanese woman would likely alienate his family. American society was deeply racist toward Asians. Anti-miscegenation laws in several states made interracial marriage illegal. And beneath all those practical concerns was a deeper question. After everything their countries had done to each other, could two people from opposite sides truly build a life together? But Tom had learned something during 3 years of war. Life was short and brutally uncertain. Tomorrow was never guaranteed. If he had found something real with Haruko, something that made him feel human again after years of violence and death, then he owed it to both of them to try. December 15th, 5 days before her scheduled departure, Tom found Haruko after evening roll. He had practiced what he wanted to say, but all his careful words evaporated. So he spoke simply, in the mix of English and Japanese they had created together. "I do not want you to get on that ship," he said. "I want you to stay with me. Marry me." Haruko stared at him. Marriage between a Japanese prisoner and an American soldier was technically possible under the War Brides Act that President Truman had signed into law on December 28, 1945, though that was still 2 weeks away. But even if it was legal, it was social suicide. She would be an outcast in both cultures. The Japanese would see her as a traitor. Americans would see her as the enemy brought home. And Tom would face consequences for choosing her over family, country, and race. But Haruko had already lost everything. Her family was dead. Her country was destroyed. Her future in Japan was a void. Tom was offering her something she thought she would never have again: safety, companionship, a reason to hope. Yet accepting meant abandoning any chance of reconnecting with her culture, her language, her identity. It meant becoming permanently other, forever foreign. "I need to think," she told him. Tom nodded and left her alone. That night, Haruko barely slept. She thought about her father, who had believed so strongly in education and progress. What would he say about his daughter marrying a former enemy soldier? She thought about the other women in the camp, some of whom had whispered about pursuing relationships with American guards as a path to better treatment. Was she any different? Was this love or just survival instinct? The next day brought unexpected clarity. A Red Cross worker arrived at the camp with updated casualty and survival lists from Japan. Haruko waited in line with dozens of other prisoners, hoping for information about family members. When her turn came, the Red Cross worker checked the lists and delivered the news Haruko had suspected, but never confirmed. Her family's entire neighborhood in Tokyo had been destroyed in the firebombing of March 10, 1945. No survivors were recorded. Her father, mother, and 2 younger siblings were listed among the estimated 100,000 dead. Haruko walked back to her tent in a daze. She had lived with uncertainty for months, holding on to a fragile hope that maybe someone had survived. Now that hope was gone. She had no family to return to, no home waiting for her. Japan was a graveyard. Tom found her an hour later, sitting alone, staring at nothing. She told him about the Red Cross information. He sat beside her and did not try to fill the silence with useless words. After a long time, Haruko turned to him and said, "Yes, I will marry you." The wedding took place on December 19th, 1 day before her scheduled repatriation. The camp chaplain agreed to perform the ceremony, a quiet affair in the small chapel tent. A few of Tom's fellow guards attended, the ones who had supported his relationship with Haruko. A handful of Japanese prisoners came as well, women who had befriended Haruko and saw this as her best chance at survival. The ceremony was brief, conducted in English, with Tom quietly translating key phrases for Haruko. When the chaplain pronounced them married, Tom kissed her gently, aware that they were making promises neither fully understood how to keep. Paperwork followed, a bureaucratic maze of military approvals and immigration documents. As Tom's wife, Haruko was now eligible for transport to the United States as a war bride. The process would take several weeks, which meant staying in the camp even after her original repatriation date passed. Some prisoners resented her changed status. "You think you're better than us now," one woman said bitterly. Haruko did not argue. She understood the anger. She was escaping while others returned to devastation. Tom and Haruko spent their brief engagement navigating the reality of their decision. They discussed Iowa, trying to prepare Haruko for a world completely unlike anything she had known. Tom described his family's farm, his parents who had immigrated from Germany 2 generations earlier, his surviving siblings. He tried to be honest about how they might react to his Japanese wife. "My mother is kind," he said. "She will accept you. My father will be harder. He lost a son, but they will come around eventually." Haruko nodded, pretending confidence she did not feel. In late January 1946, Haruko boarded a transport ship bound for San Francisco. Tom would follow 3 weeks later once his duty assignment ended. The crossing took 2 weeks, a voyage that reversed the journey she had made 3 years earlier when she sailed from Tokyo to Manila. Then, she had been full of purpose, believing she was serving her country. Now, she was stateless, suspended between a homeland that no longer existed and a foreign country that did not want her. San Francisco in February 1946 was a city celebrating victory, but still scarred by war. Haruko passed through immigration with her marriage certificate and military sponsor documents. Officials processed her efficiently but coldly. Welcome to America was not part of the vocabulary. She was given temporary housing at a facility for war brides awaiting their husband's arrival. The other women were mostly European, war brides from Britain and France. They viewed the few Asian war brides with suspicion. Haruko learned to keep to herself, to speak only when necessary to make herself invisible. Tom arrived in late February and they traveled together to Iowa by train. The journey across America stunned Haruko. The vastness of the landscape, the apparent abundance, the cities untouched by bombing. This country had fought a global war and emerged wealthier, stronger, more powerful. Japan had fought the same war and been destroyed. The injustice of it pressed down on her. Iowa was flat farmland stretching to endless horizons. Tom's family farm was modest, 200 acres of corn and soybeans worked by his father and oldest brother. The farmhouse was wood frame, 2 stories, surrounded by fields. Tom's mother met them at the door. She was a solid woman in her 50s, hands roughened by decades of farm work. She looked at Haruko for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then she stepped forward and embraced her. "Welcome home," she said simply. Haruko nearly wept with. Tom's father was less welcoming. He shook Haruko's hand with obvious reluctance and said little. Over dinner that first night, the silence was oppressive. Tom's father finally spoke. "You are asking us to accept the enemy into our home," he said. "My son David is dead because of her." Tom set down his fork carefully. "Haruko is not responsible for David's death," he said. "She is a nurse. She spent the war saving lives, not taking them." His father said nothing more, but the tension remained. Haruko understood she was on trial. Every action would be scrutinized, every mistake amplified. She worked hard to prove herself, helping Tom's mother with cooking and housework, learning American recipes, studying English. She offered her nursing skills to the community, though she needed formal licensing to practice professionally. The local hospital was skeptical at first, but they were short-staffed. Haruko's competence won them over. Within 6 months, she was working part-time in the emergency ward. The community's reaction was mixed. Some neighbors were openly hostile, refusing to acknowledge Haruko or muttering slurs when she passed. Others were curious, intrigued by the exotic stranger in their midst. A few were genuinely kind, recognizing that war created complicated situations, and that judging individuals was more productive than hating entire peoples. Gradually, Haruko found her place. She joined the local church, volunteered at the school, made herself useful in ways that could not be easily dismissed. Tom and Haruko's first child was born in November 1947, a daughter they named Mary. The birth softened Tom's father, who had lost 2 children to war and now gained a grandchild from its aftermath. He began speaking to Haruko more, even smiled when Mary grabbed his finger. Their second child, a son named David after Tom's lost brother, arrived in 1949. By then, Haruko was a fixture in the community, still foreign, but no longer quite alien. Life was not easy. Haruko faced discrimination regularly, small cruelties and large ones. She was denied service at certain stores. Parents complained about a Japanese woman working at the hospital. Children sometimes taunted Mary and David about their mother. Each incident hurt, but Haruko endured. She had survived war, imprisonment, and displacement. She could survive prejudice. Tom defended her fiercely, never tolerating disrespect. He confronted neighbors who spoke against her. He threatened to sue businesses that refused her service. He taught his children to be proud of both their heritages, American and Japanese. "This is who we are," he told them. "We do not apologize for it." Over the years, acceptance grew. Haruko's skill as a nurse saved lives. which earned respect even from those who disliked her origins. She was there when the Johnson baby stopped breathing, performing CPR that kept the child alive until the doctor arrived. She nursed elderly patients through final illnesses with a gentleness that comforted entire families. She became indispensable, and indispensability is its own form of belonging. By the 1960s, Haruko had lived in Iowa longer than she had lived in Japan. English had become her primary language, though she still dreamed in Japanese. She raised 3 children who felt fully American, even as they navigated the complexities of mixed heritage. She watched the civil rights movement with hope, seeing echoes of her own struggle in the fight for racial equality. When the Supreme Court struck down the last anti-miscegenation laws in 1967 with the Loving decision, she felt vindicated. Her marriage, once illegal in many states, was now protected everywhere. Tom and Haruko grew old together. They weathered the challenges all marriages face, disagreements and disappointments, financial struggles and family tensions. But beneath everything was the foundation they had built in that prison camp. A promise to take care of each other when the world offered no other certainty. That promise held. In the 1990s, journalists began seeking out war brides for oral history projects. Haruko agreed to be interviewed, though she spoke reluctantly about the past. The reporter asked what she wanted people to understand about her experience. Haruko thought carefully before answering. "War makes enemies of people who might otherwise have been friends," she said. "It takes enormous courage to see past the propaganda, to recognize the humanity in someone your government has taught you to hate. Tom did that for me. He saved my life with food, but he rebuilt it with respect. That is the real story. Not romance, respect." The reporter asked if she regretted leaving Japan. Haruko paused. "I regret that I had to choose," she said. "I regret that war destroyed my homeland and killed my family, but I do not regret choosing Tom. He kept his promise. He took care of me, and I took care of him. That is what marriage is. That is what being human is." Tom died in 2003 at age 85. Haruko lived 6 more years, passing in 2009 at 89. They were buried together in the Iowa cemetery, their shared headstone engraved with both English and Japanese characters. Their children and grandchildren gathered for the funeral, a mixed crowd of faces reflecting the blended heritage Haruko and Tom had created. They told stories about their grandmother, who taught them to make mochi, their grandfather, who taught them to plant corn. They remembered 2 people who had crossed an unbridgeable divide and built a bridge anyway, one small kindness at a time. The story of Haruko and Tom is one among thousands. Between 1945 and 1952, approximately 45,000 Japanese women married American servicemen and immigrated to the United States. Each had her own story of survival, compromise, and adaptation. Each faced discrimination and displacement. Each made a life in a country that had recently been at war with her homeland. These women were pioneers of a reconciliation that official treaties could never achieve, living embodiments of the possibility that enemies could become family. Their experiences challenged simple narratives about war and peace. The United States treated Japanese prisoners far better than Japan treated Allied prisoners. American POW camps, while harsh, generally followed Geneva Convention standards. Japanese camps were sites of systematic brutality and starvation. This moral distinction is real and important, yet it does not erase the complexity of individual relationships, the ways that specific people on both sides chose humanity over hatred. Tom Bennett could have walked past Haruko Yamada when she collapsed. Regulations would have supported that choice. His grief over his brother's death justified it. But he stopped, helped, and ultimately loved. That decision did not erase the crimes of Imperial Japan or invalidate the sacrifice of Allied soldiers. It simply added another layer to history, a reminder that even in war's darkest chapters, individuals retain the capacity for mercy. Haruko could have refused Tom's proposal, returned to Japan, and attempted to rebuild there. Many women did exactly that, choosing cultural continuity over foreign security. Her choice to marry Tom was pragmatic as much as romantic, a survival strategy in a world that offered few good options. That pragmatism does not diminish the courage it required. She risked everything on the promise of a man she had known for months, in a language she barely spoke, in a country actively hostile to her existence. Their story asks us to hold multiple truths simultaneously. War is horror. Empires commit atrocities. Justice demands accountability. And within those vast historical forces, Individual human beings make choices that reveal our capacity for connection across even the most absolute divisions. Haruko and Tom's marriage did not end racism or heal the wounds of war, but it proved that healing was possible, that the line between enemy and beloved is not always as fixed as governments would have us believe. The final lesson of their story is about promises kept. On September 3, 1945, a young American soldier said 5 words to an unconscious Japanese woman: "I will take care of you." He could not have known what that promise would require. Decades of defending her against prejudice, navigating cultural divides that had no map, building a family from the ruins of war. He did it anyway. And Haruko, who accepted a future she could not imagine in a country she had been taught to fear, kept her own promise to build a life with this man who had fed her when she was starving. In the end, that is what survives. Not the battles or the propaganda, not the flags or the treaties, but the small acts of care that people extend to each other in moments of crisis. A cup of water, a bowl of soup, a promise to take care of someone when the entire world has abandoned them. These are the things that make us human. These are the things that endure. If this story of courage, compassion, and unlikely love moved you, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Your subscription helps us continue sharing these forgotten stories from history that remind us of our shared humanity. Hit that like button to support this video, and most importantly, leave a comment below. We want to hear your thoughts. Do you know similar stories of reconciliation after conflict? Have your own family been touched by the aftermath of war? Share your reflections with our community. These conversations matter because they keep these important lessons alive for future generations. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.